Welcome everybody to our TOME RPG news update for the month of November 2019. For this update, we'll be doing something a little different, giving a retrospective on how the Terrain of Magical Expertise video game project came from conception to production. Today, November 11th at 11:11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, marks the 8th anniversary of the TOME web series. Hooray! But the characters and story originate even further back to the early 2000s, and even in those very early stages, it was always the dream to have TOME in the form of a game. Let's take a look. Starting in 2004, after coming up with the initial concept of TOME, inspired by the likes of the Mega Man Battle Network and Dot Hack series of games and anime, the first very rough design for a game was a linear RPG made in Flash, starring Alpha as the sole playable character. It would have had a top-down overworld and a combat system based on the Battle Network games using 3x3 grids. This concept was dropped pretty quickly, as it became evident that the passion for programming just wasn't there. But this did lead to a pursuit in the field of animation instead, which opened the door to the precursor of TOME, the TV TOME Adventure series, which ran for over 70 episodes on Newgrounds up until 2007. The most surprising takeaway from this point in time was finding that the program Flash would later not only be used as the prime animation tool for all visual assets in the TOME RPG, but even the usage of Flash's programming language ActionScript became an integral part of the process for making the game work. Moving ahead several years later to 2010, the next design concept was an episodic platformer, starring the 5 main characters of the series, also to be potentially done in Flash. Each installment would feature a couple levels and a couple boss battles, and you would switch off between Alpha and the others at various points. Ultimately, the most important part of making it happen, a dedicated programmer, couldn't be locked down. However, history repeated itself, as once again a scrapped game concept would become an eventual animated series. The basic story layout of the platform game eventually became the blueprint for the 2011 web series that would premiere the following year. Also, just as importantly, a very relevant question was posed by a fellow game developer. What is your game? This simple question lit up the way to a clearer path of eventually having a more solidified concept. That brings us to 2012, a full year into production of the TOME web series. A collaboration with another developer that eventually didn't quite pan out led to the conceptualization of the first real design document for a TOME game. This idea was for what can only be described as a mashup between a turn-based RPG and a party-style board game. 4 players would move around one of many different environments with a grid overlaid on top, getting into super quick turn-based battles against an assortment of enemies while competing with one another for various story-based objectives. The plot would have taken place sometime between TOME Seasons 1 and 2, and would have featured some new characters as well. Though it didn't get very far, this was an important learning experience in game design. However, while it was certainly a unique concept, there was too much focus on innovation, and it likely would have been too ambitious. It wasn't until a few more years later, in 2016, a while after the finale of the web series, that finally, a fitting genre was chosen and a concept was settled on, a good old 2D traditional turn-based RPG. In its earliest stages, a few different story ideas were thought up before a full design document was created. One idea that was actually at the forefront for a little while was making a fantasy-type setting where the faces recognized from the series would be reinterpreted as actually being their characters, with of course the twist being that it was actually just a tabletop game being played by the real-life versions of the main cast, sometime after the end of the web series' final episode. However, a huge dose of unexpected inspiration hit from, of all places, an episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd about the Atari Sword Quest games, where players across the United States competed for jewel-encrusted treasures. This sparked the idea of the Campaign of Champions as the driving force that would bring all the characters together, yet again making an MMORPG the setting for our heroes after all. Though this would never have been possible without, most importantly of all, the incredible crew making the game and the many donators who gave us the ability to do it. So here we are today, 8 years since the first episode of the TOME web series in 2011, and now almost 3 years since we began production on the prototype demo we built for the TOME RPG. But we're not done yet, as our next and final update video for the year will be our progress report for the entirety of 2019. And it'll include a couple of other surprises too. To all fans and supporters of the Terrain of Magical Expertise, we thank you and hope you'll stay tuned.